The last gas station was 40 miles behind me. The next one wouldn't show up for another 60. I know that stretch of highway in Nevada better than I know my own neighborhood. I've driven it 100 times. But that night, something was different. Something was standing at the side of the road that had no business being there. It was just after 2 a.m. when my headlights caught him. A man standing perfectly still at mile marker 9, not waving, not moving, just standing with his arms at his sides, facing the road. His clothes were dark. His face was pale in the headlights, and for just a second, just 1 second, I thought he smiled. I didn't stop. I'd been driving since 6 p.m., making my way from Salt Lake City to Las Vegas. It was a solo trip, something I'd done before for work. The desert at night has its own kind of silence, the kind that makes you feel very small and very alone. I had a playlist going, half a bag of chips on the passenger seat, and a gas station coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Everything was normal until that man appeared. After I passed him, I checked my rearview mirror. He was gone. Not walking away, not still standing there, just gone. The road behind me was empty and flat for as far as I could see, and there was nowhere he could have walked to that fast. No ditch deep enough to hide a standing man in less than 2 seconds. I told myself it was fatigue. I turned the music up louder. 15 minutes later, my car phone mount buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I didn't look at it right away. I waited until I found a safe stretch and glanced down at the screen. The message said one thing: you should have stopped. I felt my hands go cold on the wheel. I told myself it was a wrong number, a prank, something random. But I had not told anyone where I was. I had not posted anything online. Only my boss knew I was on this road, and my boss was asleep in Utah. I kept driving. I tried to call my wife. The call wouldn't connect. The signal out there was nearly zero, which I knew, but the text had come through, which meant whoever sent it had a signal, or they were close enough to use a different kind of connection. An hour passed. I was calming down. The music helped. The straightness of the highway helped. I was watching the mile markers count up, 44, 45, 46, when my headlights caught something again on the right shoulder. A man standing at mile marker 47, same posture, arms at his sides, face pale, facing the road. And I slowed down without meaning to, just for a second, because my foot lifted off the gas in pure confusion. It was the same man. I know how that sounds. I know the road is long and flat, and there was no possible way a man on foot could have moved from mile marker 9 to mile marker 47 in an hour of driving. But it was the same face, the same dark jacket, the same stillness. And this time, I was close enough to see that he wasn't just standing. He was watching me. His eyes tracked my car as I passed. I drove faster. My heart was slamming. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles hurt. The phone buzzed again. Slow down. I just want to talk. I didn't slow down. I pushed the car to 90. The desert blurred past on both sides. I watched the rearview mirror constantly, expecting to see headlights behind me. Nothing. The road was empty. I was alone out there, and yet somehow I was not alone. Mile marker 67. I saw him again. Same man, same posture. This time he was standing directly in the center of the right lane, not the shoulder, the lane itself. I swerved left and flew past him at nearly 100 miles an hour. I looked in the mirror, and he was still standing there in the road, watching my taillights shrink into the distance. He didn't move. He wasn't afraid of being hit. Something about that terrified me more than anything else, the complete lack of fear. My phone buzzed a third time. I didn't look at it until I reached a gas station near the outskirts of a small town called Beatty. I pulled in under the lights, hands shaking, and sat there with the engine running for a full 5 minutes before I picked up the phone. The third message said, "You passed me 3 times. That's rude. I only needed a ride." There was a fourth message. It had been sent while I was sitting in the parking lot, not while I was driving, while I was parked, under the lights, in what I thought was safety. "I'm still out there, but you left something behind at mile marker 9. Want to know what?" I didn't respond. I went inside the gas station and stood near the counter and talked to the cashier for nothing for 20 minutes just to be near a human voice. I didn't tell him what happened. I didn't know how to say it out loud without sounding crazy. When I finally got back in my car, I drove the rest of the way to Las Vegas with every light on inside the cabin, music blasting, windows up, doors locked. I never responded to the texts. I blocked the number when I got to the hotel. But I've never been able to fully explain the thing I noticed when I reviewed my dash cam footage the next morning. I have a dash cam. It records automatically. I'd forgotten about it completely until I plugged it into my laptop. At mile marker 9, there is clear footage of the man, standing exactly as I remembered. Pale face, dark jacket, arms at his sides. At mile marker 47, the footage shows the same man, same everything, and this time his lips are moving. The dash cam has no audio, but if you slow the footage down, frame by frame, you can almost read what he's saying. It took me a week to show the footage to my friend who does video editing. He slowed it down further, sharpened the image, and studied the lip movement for a long time before he looked up at me. He said the man appears to be saying the same 3 words over and over as my car passes. I was waiting. I sold that car 3 months later. I don't drive that highway anymore. I haven't told my wife the full story because I don't want her to be afraid of something I can't explain or protect her from. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, my phone will buzz on the nightstand. Unknown number. I never open those messages anymore. I've learned that some things on the road are not accidents. Some figures standing in the dark are not lost. Some people who want a ride have never needed one at all. They just want to see how long it takes before you stop, before your curiosity overrides your instincts, before you finally pull over and roll down the window and say that one fatal word, hello. I haven't driven alone at night since. My friends think it's strange. My boss makes comments about it sometimes. I just smile and say I prefer daytime travel now. What I don't say is this. 3 weeks after that drive, I was cleaning out the back seat of my car before I sold it. Tucked under the passenger seat, pressed flat against the couch that had been there a long time, was a single flame. Joker, facing up, and on the back of it, written in small, careful handwriting, words, "Thanks for the ride, mile 9." I never figured out how it got. My doors were locked the entire trip. I never stopped, and I never opened the car to anyone. But someone left that car. And that means, at some point on that empty highway, in the dark, between mile marker 9 and Las Vegas. I've told this story once before to my brother, and he didn't sleep for 2 nights. So I want you to understand that what I'm about to describe is not something I've exaggerated. I'm not trying to scare anyone for entertainment. I'm telling this because it happened. It still doesn't make sense, and I think about it almost every day. It started with a wrong turn. That's all it was supposed to be. I was driving home from a wedding in rural Tennessee. It was late October, maybe 11:30 at night, and the GPS lost signal somewhere outside of a town so small it didn't appear on most maps. The roads out there don't have good lighting. They don't have guardrails in all the places they should. They wind through thick tree lines that block out the sky completely. So when you're driving without streetlights, it feels less like a road and more like a tunnel into nothing. I missed my turn. The GPS tried to reroute and sent me down a county road I'd never been on. I figured it knew better than I did. I followed it. The road narrowed quickly.
Within about a mile, it went from 2 lanes to 1, and the pavement gave way to packed gravel. I slowed down. The trees on both sides were close enough that the branches scraped my mirrors. I started to feel that particular kind of uncomfortable that you can't quite name. Not fear exactly, but awareness. The feeling that you were somewhere you were not meant to be. I stopped the car and looked at the GPS. No signal. Completely dark screen. The reroute had vanished mid-route and left me alone on a gravel road in the middle of the Tennessee woods at midnight with no idea where I was going. I put the car in reverse to turn around. My headlights swept across the trees as I turned, and that's when I saw the house. It sat about 30 feet back from the road, half hidden by brush. No lights in the windows, old wood siding, dark with age and weather, a porch that sagged in the middle. And on the porch, sitting in a chair, was a person, perfectly still, no movement at all, just sitting there in the dark, facing the road, facing me. I stopped reversing. I don't know why I stopped. I should have kept going, but something made me pause, the way you pause when something feels wrong, but you can't identify what it is yet. The figure in the chair didn't move. I couldn't make out a face clearly because the porch was in shadow, but the posture was upright, deliberate, like a person who had been sitting there not because they were tired, but because they were waiting. I started to pull away, slowly at first, watching the house in my rearview mirror. The figure didn't move. The house stayed dark. I got about 100 feet down the road, starting to breathe again, when my engine sputtered and died. Just died. No warning, no coughing, just silence. I sat there for a moment that felt much longer than it was. I turned the key. Nothing. The dashboard lit up normally. Battery was fine, but the engine wouldn't catch. I tried again. Nothing. I looked back down the road toward the house. The porch light had come on. The chair was empty. I did not get out of the car. I want to be clear about that. I locked the doors and I kept trying the engine, and I told myself to stay calm. On the 7th or 8th try, the engine started. I drove down that gravel road faster than I should have, branches scraping the sides of the car, gravel spraying up under the wheels. I didn't care. I just drove until the road connected to something paved, and I followed the pavement until I found a gas station. The attendant inside was an older man. I told him I'd gotten lost off Highway 12. I described the road I'd been on and asked if he knew it. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I still haven't fully decoded. He said, "County Road 7? I said I didn't know what it was called. He asked if I'd seen the old Carver place, the house set back from the road. I said yes. He put down the coffee he was holding. He asked if I'd seen anyone at the house. I said there was someone sitting on the porch. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I started to feel the back of my neck prickle. Then he said, quietly, almost like he didn't want to say it at all, "That house has been abandoned since 1987. There hasn't been anyone living there in almost 40 years. I told him what I'd seen, the person in the chair, the porch light coming on, the empty chair. He nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they've heard something before and it still doesn't sit right with them. He told me a family lived there in the 80s. He didn't give names. He just said there was a man who used to sit on that porch every night, watching the road, watching for cars that turned down County Road 7 by mistake. He said the man was found dead in that chair one morning in November 1987, and the family moved out within the week, and no one had been back since. I asked him why the man used to sit and watch for cars. The attendant picked up his coffee again. He didn't answer for a moment. When he did, he said only this: "No one ever figured out what he did with the ones who stopped." I drove the rest of the way home on the main interstate with both hands on the wheel and every light inside the car burning. When I got home, I walked around the outside of my car and found deep, thin scratches on the passenger side that hadn't been there before. They ran the full length of the car in long parallel lines, too deliberate for branches, too evenly spaced, like fingers. I've been back through Tennessee twice since then. Both times I stayed strictly on the main highway, no matter how the GPS tried to reroute me. Some roads exist for a reason, and some of the things sitting in the dark at the end of those roads have been sitting there, patient and still, for a long time, waiting for someone who doesn't know better than to stop.
There is a rest stop on Interstate 70 in western Kansas that I will never pull into again. I don't care how tired I am. I don't care if my eyes are burning and my hands are getting heavy on the wheel. I will drive through the night until I find a hotel with lights and people and a front desk with a human being behind it. Because what happened to me at that rest stop changed the way I understand darkness. It was a September night. I was moving from Columbus, Ohio to Denver, Colorado, with a car packed so full I could barely see out the back window. I'd been driving for about 9 hours, and I was past the point where coffee was helping. My eyes were doing that thing where they drift for a second before you catch yourself. I knew I needed to stop. The rest stop appeared right when I needed it. I pulled in around 1 a.m. There were 2 other vehicles in the parking lot. A semi-truck with its cab light on at the far end, and a minivan parked near the restrooms. Normal enough. I parked in the middle of the lot, cracked my windows, and decided to sleep for 2 hours. I set an alarm and closed my eyes. I don't know exactly when I fell asleep, but I woke up at 1:47 a.m. to the sound of footsteps. Slow, even footsteps on the pavement, moving along the side of my car. I stayed still. My eyes were open, but I didn't move, some instinct keeping me flat and quiet. The footsteps stopped directly outside my driver's side window. I waited. Nothing happened for about 30 seconds. No knocking, no voice, just a presence, just the sense of something standing inches from the glass, separated from me by a thin barrier I suddenly very much did not trust. Then the footsteps moved again, slowly around the back of the car, around the passenger side, all the way around, completing a full circle of my vehicle. Then they stopped again, at the driver's door, same position, same silence. I turned my head very slowly and looked at the window. There was a shape there, a person, or the outline of one, standing close enough to the glass that I could see the shape of shoulders, a head, but no features. The parking lot light was behind them, which put their face in complete shadow. They were just standing there, not knocking, not moving, just standing, and I felt with absolute certainty looking at me. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I reached slowly for my phone on the center console and kept it in my hand. The shape didn't move. I watched it for what felt like several minutes. The semi-truck was still at the far end of the lot. Its cab light was still on. The minivan near the restrooms was still there. If I honked my horn, someone might come. The shape at my window took one step closer to the glass. I turned the key. I started the car. I drove out of that rest stop without looking back, and I didn't stop driving until I was in a hotel parking lot in Salina with a working card key in my hand. I know what you're thinking. It was probably just someone stretching their legs, a traveler who stopped near my car by coincidence. Maybe they were looking at their phone and drifted close to my window without noticing. I thought the same thing for about a week. Then I remembered something I hadn't processed in the moment. When I started the car and pulled out, my headlights swept across the parking lot, directly across the space where the shape had been standing, and the lot was empty. The minivan was still by the restrooms, the semi was still at the far end, but in the spot where I had parked, caught for just a second in my headlights before I pulled away, there was nothing. Not a person walking away, not someone stepping back from the light, nothing. Empty pavement. I've driven I-70 twice more since then, both times in daylight. Both times I watched for that rest stop sign, and when I saw it, kept my eyes forward and drove past without slowing down. But there's one thing I've never been able to explain.
When I arrived at the hotel in Salina and got out to check in, I found something on the outside of my driver's side window, pressed flat against the glass. A handprint, small, palm flat, fingers slightly spread, pressed from the outside in. I stood in that parking lot and looked at it for a long time. It was centered on the window, at eye level with someone standing outside, right where the shape had been. I drove to Denver the next day in full daylight. I got my car professionally washed as soon as I arrived. I've never told anyone about the handprint. Some nights I still see it when I close my eyes, small, deliberate, pressed against the glass in the dark. And what still chills me, what I cannot explain, is that when I wiped it away the next morning before the car wash, the glass on the inside fogged up in the exact same shape, as if the print wasn't on the glass at all, as if it was on me.
I need to say this first. I am not someone who imagines things. I'm a nurse. I work 12-hour shifts. I've seen real things, hard things, and I don't scare easily, and I don't make things up. I'm telling this story because I have no other way to process it, and keeping it inside has started to feel worse than saying it out loud. This happened on a Tuesday night in early March on a stretch of US 27 in rural Florida between Sebring and Avon Park. If you've ever driven that road at night, you know how dark it gets out there. Flat cattle country on both sides, no development, no streetlights, just road and sky and flatness in every direction. I was coming off a double shift and driving home on autopilot the way nurses do. It was around 2:15 a.m. The road was empty. I had the radio on low and the heat running, and I was tired but alert, the way you are when your body knows it needs to get you home safely. I saw her at about a quarter mile out. A woman standing in the grass median between the two lanes of the divided highway. She was wearing a white nightgown, long, loose, the kind of thing you sleep in. Her hair was long and dark and loose around her face. She was barefoot, and she was standing perfectly still, facing the northbound lane, facing me, with her arms crossed over her chest. I slowed down. I put my hazards on. Everything in my training said there might be a medical emergency, a trauma patient, dissociation, sleepwalking, a car accident nearby. I pulled to the shoulder and stopped about 50 feet past her. I watched her in my rearview mirror. She hadn't moved. I called 911. I told the dispatcher what I was seeing, a woman on foot on US 27 in the median, appearing disoriented, possible medical situation. The dispatcher said she'd send a unit and asked me to stay on the line. I watched the woman in my mirror. She was still facing north, still not moving. Then, slowly, she turned her head and looked directly at my car. Even from 50 feet away, even through a rearview mirror in the dark, that movement made my stomach drop. It was too deliberate, too precise, like she had been aware of me the entire time and had only now decided to acknowledge it. I stayed on with the dispatcher. I described what I was seeing. The dispatcher asked if the woman appeared injured. I said I couldn't tell from where I was. The dispatcher said she didn't want me to approach alone, to wait for the unit. I waited. The woman began walking toward my car. She walked slowly, steadily down the median toward my back bumper, arms still crossed, head slightly down, barefoot on the wet grass. I told the dispatcher she was approaching my vehicle. The dispatcher said to keep my doors locked. I did. I watched her come. She got within about 20 feet of my car and then stopped. She looked up. I could see her face in the mirror. Young, maybe mid-20s. She was not injured that I could see. There was no blood, no visible trauma. Her expression was completely flat, not confused, not afraid, not asking for help, just flat and watching. She raised one hand and pointed at me. Not a wave, not a signal, a point, slow, deliberate, directly at me in the driver's seat, like she was identifying me specifically. I turned around in my seat to look at her through the rear window instead of the mirror.
The road behind me was empty. She was gone. I told the dispatcher what happened. She said she heard me, but the unit was still 4 minutes out. I sat there on the shoulder for those 4 minutes with every light in the car on. When the deputy arrived, I got out and talked to him, and he walked the median with his flashlight for about 10 minutes. He found nothing. No footprints in the wet grass, no signs of anyone on foot, nothing on the nearby roads, no cars pulled over, no accident scene. He was kind about it. He said exhaustion can do strange things to perception. I thanked him and drove home. I slept for 11 hours. When I woke, I sat at my kitchen table and went over every detail of what I'd seen. I'm a medical professional. I understand hypnagogic hallucinations. I understand the way fatigue distorts perception. I applied every rational framework I had. And then I remembered something I'd been too shaken to think about in the moment. When the woman pointed at me, the interior of my car fogged up, instantly, all the windows at once, like the temperature dropped 10 degrees in 1 second. In March, in Florida, with the heat running. There is one more thing. The next day, I went back to that stretch of highway in daylight because I'm a nurse and I like facts, and I wanted to see the median clearly in the light. I parked on the shoulder near where I'd stopped. I walked to the median. In the center of the grass, in the spot where she had first been standing when I pulled over, there was a cluster of small white wildflowers. Nothing unusual about that. Wildflowers grow on medians everywhere. But they were pressed flat, in a circle, roughly the size of 2 feet standing close together, as if something had been standing on them for a long time.
My girlfriend Kayla and I have agreed we will never talk about this to anyone who wasn't there. But she's moved on, we've broken up since, and I've been carrying this alone for 3 years now, so I'm gonna say it. There was something on that road in eastern Oregon, and it followed us for 62 miles. We were driving back from a camping trip in the Wallowa Mountains, heading west toward Portland on Highway 84. It was mid-July, a Sunday night, and we'd hit the road late because we were trying to get one last sunset from the trailhead. By the time we merged onto 84 heading west, it was past 10, and the sky was the deep blue black of full rural dark. For the first 30 miles or so, everything was normal. Light traffic, the occasional semi, the river running along the right side of the highway, the canyon walls rising on both sides. It's beautiful country, even in the dark. We had music going, and we were talking about the trip, and it was easy and relaxed. Kayla noticed it first. She was in the passenger seat, and she turned around to look behind us and said, "That car has been behind us for a while." I looked in the rearview mirror. There were headlights back there, maybe a quarter mile behind us. 2 headlights, close together, lower than a truck. A car. I'd noticed lights behind me for a while, but hadn't thought about it. Highways have cars on them. That's normal. "How long?" I said. She said she'd first noticed them around 30 miles back, since we merged. I watched the mirror. The lights maintained the same distance. I sped up slightly. The lights sped up. I slowed down. The lights slowed down. For about 10 miles, I tested this in small ways, not panicking, just observing. Every time I adjusted my speed, the lights adjusted to match. The distance between us never changed. I told Kayla what I'd noticed. She turned in her seat and watched out the back window for several minutes. Then she said, "Pull over." I said that was the last thing I wanted to do. She said, "Just slow down until they have to pass us." I slowed gradually, down to about 40 miles an hour on a highway where the limit was 65. We were in a canyon, the river on one side, rock walls on the other. Not a lot of shoulder, but cars behind you at 40 will pass. It's instinct. It's impatience. Everyone passes. The car behind us slowed to 40. I went down to 30, hazards on, practically crawling, in a 65 zone. The car behind us went to 30. Kayla said something under her breath that I won't repeat here. She grabbed my arm. I kept driving. I got back up to speed because we were both scared of stopping, scared of the shoulder, scared of that canyon.
At mile marker 182, there was a wide spot on the right, almost like a primitive pullout. On an impulse I don't fully understand, I swung hard to the right and pulled into it and stopped, cut my headlights. Kayla said my name once, sharply, like a warning. We sat in the dark and waited for the car to pass. And it did. It drove past us at normal speed, just a pair of red taillights moving west, an ordinary car. And we both exhaled, and Kayla laughed a little from relief, and I started the car again. I pulled back onto the highway. I accelerated to 65. We drove in silence for a few minutes, both decompressing. At exactly the distance we'd been maintaining before, the headlights appeared behind us again. Same distance, same spacing, same low-sitting headlights. Neither of us spoke. I pushed the car to 80. The lights matched. I moved into the left lane. The lights moved. I moved back right. The lights followed. I'm not going to pretend I was calm. I wasn't. I was pressing 85 on a dark canyon highway with a car that had pulled off, let us pass, and then appeared behind us again in the same position, like it had never moved. I called 911 at mile marker 196. I told them what was happening. The dispatcher asked me to describe the vehicle. I said I couldn't, just two headlights, close together, roughly car height. The dispatcher said there was no patrol car in that stretch, but they'd try to get someone heading east on the highway to watch for us. At mile marker 203, we came out of the canyon and the highway widened. I moved into the right lane. The lights were still there. I took an exit ramp at the last minute without signaling, barely making it, the tires chirping on the curve. We pulled into a gas station at the top of the ramp. We sat there, both shaken. I watched the on-ramp. No car followed us off. The road was empty. We stayed at that gas station for 45 minutes. Kayla went inside and talked to the attendant and drank a bottle of water. I sat in the car and watched the highway overpass. No car stopped. No car slowed. No one came looking. When we got back on the highway heading west, there were no lights behind us for the rest of the drive. We reached Portland just after 1 a.m. We didn't talk about it that night. We didn't talk about it for almost a week. When we finally did, Kayla said one thing that I haven't been able to shake. She said that when we pulled into the pullout with the headlights off, while we were sitting in the dark waiting for the car to pass, she looked in the passenger side mirror. She said the lights behind us had gone out. Not past us, not slowed down, gone out like they'd been switched off while the car was still behind us on the road. And then the car went past us at highway speed with no headlights on a canyon road in the dark. That's not a person driving to a destination. That's a person who didn't need lights to see.
I grew up driving rural roads. I know the difference between a house that looks lived in and a house that looks wrong. I know it the way you know it in your body before you can explain it with words. And the farmhouse I passed on County Road 14 in southern Illinois looked wrong in a way I've never fully been able to describe. I was 23, driving back from a friend's place after a late dinner. Nothing special about the night. Mid-November, cold and clear, maybe 11 p.m. The kind of night where you can see every star because there's no moisture in the air and no light for miles. County Road 14 runs through flat agricultural land mostly, corn and soybean fields that look endless in the dark, interrupted occasionally by a farmhouse set back from the road. I'd driven this road probably 200 times in my life. I knew every property on it by sight. The farmhouse was new, or rather, I'd never noticed it before. It sat about 100 feet back from the road, 2 stories, right siding that had gone gray with age. It looked old, the kind of old that accumulates over decades, not years. But I was certain, absolutely certain, that this house had not been on this road the last time I drove it, which was 4 days earlier. I slowed down. The front door was open, wide open. Late November, below freezing, the door was open and a single light was on inside, somewhere at the back of the house, throwing just enough glow to show the shape of the interior. I couldn't see anyone inside.
There was a car parked in the gravel driveway, a newer car, a sedan, totally out of place against the old farmhouse. Engine cold, no exhaust vapor. I stopped at the road. I sat there for a moment and ran through explanations. Someone had just bought the old property. Someone was doing late-night work on the house. The door blew open. Any of those things could be true, but combined, the cold, the open door, the light, the car, the absolute silence, combined, it felt like a scene where something had just happened or was about to happen, a held breath. I took out my phone to call the non-emergency line just to report an open door on a cold night when my headlights caught movement in the upstairs window. A face, looking down at me. I couldn't make out features from the road, just a pale oval, a face-shaped presence in the dark upstairs window, perfectly still, watching my car. I put the car in drive and left. I drove the last 6 miles home telling myself it was just someone who lived there, just a person who happened to be awake and happened to look out the window and happened to have their front door open in the middle of winter at 11 p.m. The next morning, I drove back in daylight. There was no house. I'm not being dramatic. I drove the entire length of County Road 14, slowly, watching both sides. There was no farmhouse, there was no gravel driveway. There was a field on the right side of the road, plowed flat after harvest, with no building on it and no foundation and no sign that a building had ever stood there. I stopped the car and walked to the fence line. The field was smooth and regular, the turned earth frozen in the morning cold. No debris, no tire tracks where a driveway would have been, nothing. I drove to the county assessor's office that afternoon. I asked about properties on County Road 14. I described the location based on landmarks I knew. The assessor looked it up and told me the parcel in question had been farmland, unimproved, no structures since at least the early 1960s. No house. No house on record, no house in the field, no house that night. And yet, I saw it. I saw the light inside. I saw the car in the driveway. I saw the face in the window. I've done enough reading since then to know that other people have had experiences like this. Buildings that appear and don't appear, places that exist for one moment and not the next. I don't know what to do with that. I don't have a framework for it. But the thing that still keeps me up some nights is this. The face in the window was looking at me. Not at the road generally, not at the sky, at me, at my car specifically, the way you look at something you've been watching for and have finally seen arrive. And whatever I interrupted when I drove past that night, whatever scene I witnessed, it was patient enough to wait until daylight to disappear. I wonder sometimes if I'd knocked on that open door, whether I would have found the inside of the house the same way I found the field the next morning. Empty, completely empty. Or whether I would have found something that didn't disappear when it should have.
This one is short, not because nothing happened, but because I can only bring myself to say the parts I'm sure of. The parts I'm not sure of, I've spent 2 years trying to decide whether to believe, and I still haven't decided. I was driving through rural Mississippi on Highway 61 at around 3 a.m., heading south. It was August, brutal heat even in the middle of the night. I had the AC cranked and I was making good time on an empty road, the kind of driving where you enter a half-meditative state and the miles just unspool. There was an old railroad underpass ahead, the kind that sits low over the road, single lane under. The concrete was old and stained and the clearance sign was faded. Normal, ordinary. Hundreds of underpasses like it all through the South. My headlights picked it up from about a quarter-mile out, and there was someone under it. Standing against the far wall of the underpass, pressed against the concrete in the shadows, completely still. Too still. The way a person stands when they're deliberately not being seen, not waiting, hiding. I could see them because my headlights reached just far enough into the opening to catch the edge of a shape, clothing maybe, or a figure, dark against dark concrete, not quite invisible. Every instinct I had told me not to slow down, so I didn't. I kept my speed and I passed through that underpass in less than 3 seconds.
In those 3 seconds, looking straight ahead, not turning my head, I was aware of the figure in my peripheral vision, left side, against the wall, still not moving. And then I was through and out the other side, and the open road was in front of me. I drove another 20 miles before I let myself think about it. Here is the part I'm not sure I should say. When I drove through the underpass, in the 2 or 3 seconds that I was inside it, the temperature in my car dropped, sharply, like opening a freezer door. The AC hadn't changed, nothing had changed. And then I was through, and the temperature went back to normal. I know cars do strange things. I know there are drafts and air pockets under bridges, I know. But there's one more thing, and this is the part I've never said out loud. In the rear-view mirror, after I was through, I looked back at the underpass from the other side. The figure was on my side of the underpass now, not walking, not running, just there at the road-level edge, looking after my taillights. In less than 3 seconds, they had crossed from the far wall to the near edge. 3 seconds, the length of the underpass. I don't know what I passed through that night. I don't know what was standing against that concrete wall in the dark on a Mississippi highway at 3 a.m. I don't know how it moved that fast. I know one thing. It was watching me leave.
I'm a long-haul truck driver. I've logged somewhere around 2 million miles over 18 years. I've driven through 49 states. I've driven in blizzards and floods and dead summer heat so intense the asphalt goes soft. I am not a man who rattles easily. What I heard on Channel 19 on a Tuesday night in the Texas Panhandle rattled me to the bone. It was late March, westbound on I-40, about 60 miles east of Amarillo, 3 in the morning. I hadn't heard another voice on the CB in almost 2 hours, which wasn't unusual for that stretch. The Panhandle at night is empty. I mean, genuinely empty. You can go 20, 30 miles without seeing another vehicle. The radio crackled. I figured it was another driver picking up from a distance. Channel 19 is the standard trucker channel. I reached over and turned up the volume. The voice that came through was not a trucker. I say that not because of what it said, but because of what it sounded like. Something about the cadence was wrong. Not accented, not distorted by static, wrong in some deeper way, the way you'd know a recording of a voice from a real one, flat where emotion should be, measured where it shouldn't be. It said, "Big truck on 40. You passed me back at the rest stop." I hadn't passed any vehicle at the last rest stop. I had pulled through it without stopping, and I hadn't seen another truck or car. I picked up the handset. I said, "Say your handle, come back." Nothing for a moment. Then, "You didn't look over when you passed. That was rude. I was right there." I looked in my mirrors. Nothing behind me. Nothing on either side. I said, "I don't see you on the road, friend. What's your 20? The voice said, "I'm not on the road." I put down the handset. The radio crackled again, almost immediately. The voice said, "Do you want to know what's in the back of your trailer?" I felt the hair on my arms stand up. My trailer was loaded in Albuquerque, sealed, tagged. I was solo. No one else had been near that trailer since the loading dock. I said, slowly, "Back off this channel." The voice said, "I've been in your trailer since Albuquerque." I did not respond. I called my dispatcher on my cell phone. I told her to call ahead and have a highway patrol unit meet me at the Amarillo truck stop. I didn't tell her why. I just said it was a security concern. I drove those 60 miles with my eyes going constantly between the road and every mirror. I saw no other vehicles for the entire stretch. The CB was silent. The patrol unit met me at the Flying J outside Amarillo. 2 officers, both of them good about it, no judgment. I told them the situation. They unsealed the trailer and did a full walkthrough with flashlights. The trailer was empty of people. The load was intact and undisturbed. The seal on the rear door was unbroken from the outside. From the outside. One of the officers pointed it out without saying anything, just held his flashlight on the door frame and let me look. From inside the trailer,
The seal looked like it had been pressed back into place carefully, deliberately, but the adhesive was broken. Something had opened that door from within and then tried to reseal it from within. They did a full sweep of the truck stop lot. They found nothing. I sat in the cab for a long time after they left. The radio was off. The lot was lit and there were other trucks around. I was not alone. But I thought about that voice saying, "I've been in your trailer since Albuquerque." I thought about 200 miles of night highway with something sealed in the back of my load. I thought about how it knew I hadn't looked over at the rest stop, how it knew my exact location, how it had been watching me through the walls of a metal trailer for 200 miles. I called my company and had the trailer reassigned. I drove empty to Amarillo and dead-headed home. I still run I-40. I still monitor Channel 19. It's been 3 years, and I've never heard that voice again. But some nights, when it's past 2 and the panhandle goes completely black and the CB crackles with static in the long empty miles between exits, I watch my mirrors a little longer than I should. And I don't stop at rest stops in the dark anymore. Not once, not ever.
I've been trying to figure out the right way to tell this story for months. There isn't one, so I'll just tell it the way it happened, and you can decide what you think. I was driving through the Ozarks in southern Missouri in October, coming back from a solo hiking trip. The leaf color was peak, the kind of autumn that makes you drive slower just to look at it. But I'd stayed too long on the trail, and by the time I got back to my car and started the drive home, it was past 9 p.m., and the mountain roads in that area go dark very fast. I want to be precise about the location. It was on a 2-lane road about 12 miles south of Van Buren, Missouri, winding through national forest land. No street lights, dense tree coverage on both sides. My headlights felt thin in that dark. I came around a curve and had to brake hard because there was a child standing in the road. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, light-colored dress, dark hair, standing in the center of my lane, facing me, directly in my headlights. I came to a complete stop about 15 feet from her. I turned on my hazards. She didn't move. She didn't flinch at the headlights. She just stood there, looking at my car. I rolled down my window. I called out, "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" She didn't answer. I got out of the car. I want to be honest that every reasonable part of my brain said this was a child who needed help, a kid who'd wandered from a campsite maybe, a kid who was hurt or frightened. I had no logical reason not to approach her. I took 2 or 3 steps toward her and she took 1 step back, not afraid, not startled, deliberate, like she was maintaining distance. I stopped. "It's okay," I said. "I'm not gonna hurt you. Are you lost?" She tilted her head. It was such a strange movement, slow, sideways, like she was trying to understand the question, like it was in a language she was translating. "I live nearby," she said. Her voice was perfectly calm, not the voice of a frightened child. No waver, no tears, just completely even. I said, "Where nearby? Can you show me? I can drive you home." She looked past me at the car, and something in her expression shifted. It was subtle, but I saw it. She was looking at the back seat, and whatever she saw there, or whatever she was looking for, made her expression change. She said, "You should check your back seat." I turned around and looked. The back seat was empty. My hiking pack was there, a water bottle, nothing else. When I turned back, she was gone. I stood in the middle of that road for several seconds. I looked in both directions. The tree line was dense on both sides. No gap a child could have slipped through that fast. There was no sound of movement, no rustling, just silence. I got back in the car. I sat there. Then, because she had said it, I turned fully around and looked at the back seat. Really looked. I moved my pack. I checked the floor. Under the front passenger seat, pressed against the underside, I found something. A folded piece of paper. I opened it with shaking hands. It was a drawing, a child's drawing, done in crayon. A car on a road, trees on both sides, and behind the car, in the road,
drawn in red crayon a figure, stick figure, arms out, mouth open. On the back of the paper, in the careful block letters of a young child, were 4 words. It was behind you. The paper was old, not fresh, creased and soft, the crayon faded. It had been under that seat for some time, possibly since before I bought the car. I've owned it for 2 years. I drove out of the Ozarks that night without stopping, on the main highway with the interior lights on and every mirror monitored. I've never identified the child, never found an explanation for the drawing, never been back to that specific road. But here is the thing I came back to over and over in the weeks that followed. She said, I live nearby. Not, I'm lost. Not, help me. She said she lived nearby. And she looked at my back seat before she told me to check it, like she already knew what was there, like she'd seen it before, like she had put it there herself.
The last story is my own, not a friend's, not a cousin's, not something I heard secondhand, mine. And it is the reason I started collecting these stories in the first place, because after what happened to me, I needed to know I wasn't alone. I was driving from Nashville to Charlotte in November, solo, on a route I'd driven several times before. It's about a 7-hour drive through Tennessee and the western edge of North Carolina. I'd planned to stop and sleep somewhere around Cookeville, but I was making good time and feeling alert, so I pushed on. Somewhere in the mountains of eastern Tennessee, around midnight, I missed an exit. The GPS rerouted me through what it described as a shorter alternative, winding me off the interstate and onto a state highway through the mountains. I'd never taken that route before. About 40 minutes down this alternate road, I came upon a town, a real town, gas station, diner with lights on, a motel with a vacancy sign glowing red, a water tower, a church, a post office. Not big, maybe 3 or 4 blocks of actual development, but real, lit, awake in the middle of the night. I pulled into the diner parking lot. I was hungry and I needed coffee. I went inside. There were 2 other customers, a man at the counter, older, in overalls, a woman in a booth near the window, reading, a waitress behind the counter. Normal. Every surface lit with the particular flat light of small-town diners, country music from a radio on the shelf, pie under a glass case. I sat at the counter and ordered coffee and eggs. The waitress was friendly, asked where I was headed. I said Charlotte. She said that was a long drive. I said I was making good time. The older man at the counter said, without turning to look at me, "You don't want to be on these roads too much past 1 a.m. I said, "Is there something wrong with the roads?" He didn't answer that. He finished his coffee and put money on the counter and left. I ate my eggs, I drank my coffee. I used the restroom, which was down a narrow hall at the back of the diner, past a bulletin board covered in papers and photos and local notices. Normal. A lost dog flyer, a church sale announcement, some kind of civic meeting notice. One thing on the board was handwritten, a note card pinned in the upper corner. It said, "If you are reading this and you don't know how you got here, leave now. Don't ask questions, just leave." I stood in that hallway and looked at that card for a long time. I paid my bill. I was polite. I did not ask about the card. I got in my car and drove. I found my way back to the interstate about 20 minutes later and drove the rest of the way to Charlotte without stopping. In the morning, before I went to the meeting I'd driven there for, I looked up the town on my phone. I knew the state highway I'd been on. I knew approximately where I'd been based on my distance from the interstate. I looked at satellite maps. I searched for towns in that corridor. I looked for diners and motels and gas stations. Nothing. No town on that highway in that location. No diner, no motel. The satellite view showed mountain road, trees,
and nothing else for miles in either direction from where the town should have been. I called my cell carrier and asked them to pull my location data for that night. I wanted GPS proof that I'd been where I thought I'd been. The data showed my phone at standard interstate coordinates until I exited, then showed a gap, 48 minutes of no location data. Then my phone reappeared back on the interstate, continuing east. 48 minutes without location data, like I had been somewhere that my phone could not track. I still have the receipt from the diner. I found it in my jacket pocket when I got home. It's regular receipt paper, standard diner format, eggs, coffee, tax, total. At the top, where the restaurant name should be printed, there is nothing, just a blank space, like the printer had no name to print. And at the bottom, below the total, in small print where most diners put their address and phone number, it says only this: "You were here, now you're not. Don't come back." I've shown that receipt to 4 people. Every one of them got uncomfortable and changed the subject, and I could see in their faces that they didn't want to look at it for too long. I keep it in a drawer in my desk. I don't throw it away because it's the only proof I have that any of it happened, that the town was real, that I sat in that diner and ate, and a stranger warned me, and a note card on the bulletin board told me to leave. Every now and then I take it out and look at it, and every time I do, I think about the waitress who was friendly and asked where I was headed, and the woman reading in the booth, and the old man in overalls who wouldn't look at me when he said, "You don't want to be on these roads too much past 1 a.m. And I wonder who they were, what they were, whether they were warning me out of kindness or warning me because they already knew it was too late and the best they could do was make sure I kept moving. I made it to Charlotte. I made it home, but I've never taken that route again. I've never driven through those mountains at night. And whenever my GPS suggests an alternate route through unfamiliar roads after dark, I override it every single time. Because somewhere in those mountains is a town that doesn't exist in daylight. And I think the reason that note card was on the bulletin board is because I wasn't the first person to wander in. I'm just one of the ones who left.